Alright, here we are, concept 33.5. Echinoderms and chordates are deuterostomes. This will be the last group we look at. The chordates we're actually going to save into the next chapter. That would be the animals that have a vertebrate. So that would include mammals, reptiles, birds, and the like. But we're going to look at the echinoderms just briefly, just to kind of mention some of them. Both of these groups are deuterostomes. Remember we talked about proteostomes and deuterostomes, and the proteostomes develop the mouth first from the blastopore, and the deuterostomes develop the anus first from the blastopore in early embryonic development. So the echinoderms would include your sea stars and sea urchins, and then of course the chordates would include all the vertebrates, what we're going to look at in the next chapter. And both of these constitute the clade Deuterostomia, which we already mentioned what that means. Deuterostomes share radial cleavage. Remember we talked about how that embryonic development occurs, where you have that first fertilized cell then goes on to subdivide quickly and through cleavage, and we have radial cleavage and the formation of the anus first from the blastopore. However, some other animals also share these developmental characteristics, and deuterostomes are primarily defined by DNA similarities. So we're on to our last little category here, the deuterostomia, and we're not going to mention the vertebrates yet, which belong in this category. We're going to save those for the next chapter. So we're just going to look at the echinoderms. The echinoderms are the sea stars and some of the other aquatic animals. A thin epidermis covering an endoskeleton of hard calcareous plates. They have some unique body features like tube feet that we'll take a look at. Males and females are usually separate, and sexual reproduction is usually external. In other words, they release sperm and eggs into the water around them for that to occur. So a sea star or a starfish is a good example of an echinoderm, and this echinoderm has some interesting features. He has these little tube feet on the bottom. He does have a separate stomach and anus, but a very short digestive tract, and features that you don't find in a lot of the other animal creatures. Most adult echinoderms have radial symmetry with multiples of 5, like this guy right here, and echinoderm larvae have what we call bilateral symmetry. If you take a look in some of the videos, it shows some of the tube feet of the little starfish as they're crawling around. And living echinoderms are divided into 5 classes. We won't go into much detail, just to kind of show you some examples of them. So these are the various 5 classes of the current echinoderms that you can find in the oceans around you. Sea stars or starfish are probably the ones that you're most familiar with. They have multiple arms radiating out from a central disc. They oftentimes feed on everything from algae to clams. They have the ability to grab clams and oysters and pry them open with their tubed feet, and they basically then stick their stomach into the clam shell and digest the clam, and then pull in that digested material. And it says sea stars can regrow lost arms. They have the ability to regrow parts that become missing. So here's an example of one that's not often seen, called a sea daisy. They actually mentioned that the sea daisy was discovered in 1986 and only 3 species are known. So that's a kind of a rare one, a newly discovered one, not like the normal sea stars that we see. Brittle stars, another good example. They have a distinct central disc, long, flexible arms. They look a little bit different from your normal starfish or sea stars. Sea urchins and sand dollars, again, they are very similar to starfish, but they have no arms, but they do have rows of tube feet. So here's a sea urchin. And then sea lilies and feather stars are similar looking to starfish in a way, but they live attached to a substrate oftentimes. Some of them become attached like a barnacle and stay in one place, and some of them are sessile and never hardly move from that one spot, and others are motile and they crawl around, much more similar to a starfish. And both of these are suspension feeders. They basically pull particulates out of the water, floating food particles that are just coming by. Last but not least, a sea cucumber, kind of an odd looking creature. They don't have spines. They have a very reduced endoskeleton, and they do not look much like the other echinoderms. They don't look much like a starfish or a sand dollar or anything like that. They do have tube feet along the bottom, and some of them have little tentacles on the bottom developed from their tube feet. Alright, and that would be it. And then we would go on to the chordates. The chordates are going to include your vertebrates we're going to look at. These are all bilaterally symmetrical coelomates with segmented bodies. You don't really think about mammals like humans have segmented bodies, but we'll talk about how that is very true. We do. Chordates share many features of embryonic development with echinoderms, but have evolved separately for at least 500 million years. So it's kind of odd to think that you are more closely related to a starfish than, say, a lobster. But that would be true. You are more closely related to a starfish than you are an earthworm. You would think earthworms and starfish pretty much the same, but they're not, and we are more closely related to the echinoderm than we are the earthworm. So we're going to stop right there. I know this chapter is heavy on all the variety of living creatures. You might want to take a look at the end of the textbook. There's a great overview. So this is a great one-page overview, or we can divide it into 2 pages here, and it is very good at just kind of giving you some of the basics. It kind of mentions why they're important, what they have about them, and again, I don't want you to get caught up on the details of the individual creatures, but I want you to look at the categories. What does it mean to be a eumetozoa, or what does it mean to be bilateral, or to be a protostome or a deuterostome? Those are the categories that you need to be most familiar with, and I would very much tell you to watch the various crash course videos. I think they were very helpful. Both of the crash course videos that are linked to for chapter 33 and chapter 32, if you kind of watch them together, they kind of help cement that knowledge and help you understand the categories that he's talking about. If you have any questions, let me know. Again, I'm sorry for the delay in this. I have tried not to cough too much in these recordings, and again, I'll see you online, and we'll get ready for our next quiz and our upcoming chapters. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.